you have ever seen. Big thank you to Brad for creating that for me. It's really setting the tone perfectly. Welcome to the first episode of Beetlegust. I'm going to be creating all the characters that go in the Beetlejuice waiting room, all August long. As you saw from the title, I am going to be starting this one off with the smoking man, one of my favorites. And at the end of the video, I'm going to be prepping all of the other characters that I'm going to be doing this month, because the better prepared I am, the more I can create. Actually, I'm going to be creating them all. I just don't know how long it's going to take. So Beetlegust may end up being Beetletember. We'll see how it goes. So no more talking, let's get started. To begin this creation, I'm going to be starting with a dollar store skeleton, which I happen to have a large jar full of. I tend to purchase these every time I see them in the dollar store around Halloween because they always come in handy. And they're especially going to come in handy today. I'm also going to be grabbing the chair that the smoking man is going to be sitting in so I can make sure I get him sitting correctly. These skeletons tend to have joints at the hips and at the shoulders, but they're not enough joints so that I can sit him properly in the chair. So I'm going to begin clipping him apart with some flush cutters, and I'm also going to remove his head because I'm going to be making a specially sculpted face so he looks more like the smoking man from the movie. There are also a few extra bones. There's like some clavicles that are kind of out of control and a few other pieces that are manufactured so that they can easily put the skeletons together, but they're not necessary for my creation. I'm also going to be cutting the bones apart at the joints where the elbow and the knees are so that he can sit comfortably in the chair. It's going to take quite a bit of glue to put him back together again, so I'm going to protect the chair with some aluminum foil. Aluminum foil is great for this because you can really shape it to the chair. I want to make sure that I have the shape of the chair correct so that once I remove the foil, he sits in it perfectly. The first piece I'm going to place down is the torso because that just makes the most sense. However, I do need to sculpt the head onto the neck before I glue him down because it's just going to be easier to do that way. However, I wanted to make sure that this whole thing was going to work from the beginning, so I did a few little tests by holding the bones up to where he was going to be sitting. To begin sculpting the head, I'm starting with some aluminum foil and I'm just going to hot glue that onto the spine, I guess. I was going to say neck stem, but that seems gross. We'll go with spine. I'm using paper clay for the sculpting process just because that's my favorite clay to use. However, polymer clay, I just don't think it would be a good choice in this situation because you do have to bake it in the oven and the rest of the skeleton is made of plastic and I'm just not sure how well it would hold up. To begin creating the head, I am adding a thin layer of paper clay over the aluminum foil and then slowly blending it into the neck area. I start by pushing in the eye area because this is going to be underneath the brow. And I always say this whenever I'm sculpting, I am not the best at sculpting faces. I just kind of push clay around until it looks how I want it to look. So I'm not the best at describing this, but I will try. I put a little teardrop shape from the top of where the forehead is over the area where I pushed in for the eyes, and now I'm just going to blend it in to start creating the nose. Once that's blended, I can push into the clay to create an area for the mouth. In the movie, he does seem to have a bit of a smirk whenever he's talking to Adam, so I want to make sure and depict that on his face. I'm continually reshaping the area around the chin and the neck to try and make sure it looks how I want it to look. Once I was happy with some of the base features, I decided to let it dry. Once it's dry, I can take my craft knife and cut into some of the clay that I felt was just a little bit too much. I felt like his nose needed to be thinner, so I'm very carefully shaving off just a little bit on either side. Then I can start building up the cheek area. If you want to attach wet paper clay to dry paper clay, just add a little bit of water and then put the wet paper clay where you want it to be and start blending it in. This is going to build up his cheekbones and his cheeks just a little bit. I also need to add the eyes into the eye socket, so I'm doing this the same way by adding a bit of water and adding some wet clay that I've rolled into a ball. I'm making sure that they are the same size before I push them into place. Then I can kind of smush them around, I guess, until I like the shape of the eyes inside the eye sockets. I noticed in my reference that he does have some pretty defined cheeks, so I continued to build those up because I do want him to look as screen accurate as I can. So he's got some little cherub cheeks going on either side of his nose. And I'm just continuing to build up and take away clay wherever I think I need to so I get the result that I want. Once everything's dry, I did a little bit of sanding to smooth things out, and then I was ready to get back to putting the rest of his body together. After placing him back in the chair with his head attached, I realized he was sitting up pretty tall and I wanted him to sit lower in the chair. So I'm cutting off the bottom part of his pelvic bone. Once I do the next few steps, you really won't be able to tell what part of his bones are cut off, so I don't think this will be a problem, but this will help him sit a little bit lower without me having to cut out part of his spine. And I'm really wondering what YouTube review is going to think of this voiceover. To start putting his legs together, I am putting a little bit of hot glue on one end of the hip and putting that into the side of the pelvic bone. I do want his legs to be crossed. I want him to look really relaxed and like he's just, taking his time in the waiting room. So I made sure one of the bones was crossing over the other leg. I'm making all of these bone connections with hot glue, and also I had to figure out which side of the leg the little skinny bones go on because I kind of didn't pay attention when I was taking him apart, so I just had to check real quick. And then I also wanted to cut off his toes so that his toes look a little bit more realistic. This was a tip I got from the channel Art and Anxiety, which I will link down below. She also did a really cool skeleton video, which is one of the videos that gave me the initial idea on how to create this smoking man. So definitely check it out. I realized pretty quickly that my skeleton's feet were just a little bit too short for this chair. His legs were kind of dangling above the floor, so I decided to turn one of the feet a vertical direction so his toes would just be barely touching the floor. And to do this, I decided to cut off the toes and then turn them flat so it does look like he is gently resting one of his feet on the ground, and that's kind of what's helping him keep his balance. Back to the glue. As I mentioned, I'm using hot glue to put all of the different bone pieces together. However, I do plan to reinforce this with another glue down the road because I'm basically going to be paper macheing his entire body. However, using the hot glue in the beginning just really makes this process go by quickly, and I know all the bones are going to stay where I want them to stay. Now that I had the lower part of his body put together how I liked it, I realized I wanted his upper part to be turning a little bit. In the movie, he's turning to speak to Adam, and so I wanted him to be turning towards the side table, or in my waiting room, he's actually going to be turning a little bit more towards the couch, which is going to be full of other waiting room characters.
You want a cigarette?
Oh, no, thank you.
I'm trying to cut down myself.
It was super easy just to cut into his back and then reposition him with some glue. Now I'm going to be adding on his arms in the very same process where I'm just gluing them on one by one. I'm going to have one hand that's just barely touching the top of the chair arm, and then the other hand is actually going to be holding his cigarette. Of course, he's the smoking man. He needs to have his cigarette, of course. So I'm going to be positioning this arm, making sure I like the location and making sure it doesn't block his face too much. Before calling this finished, I wanted to put him in the chair one more time to make sure I just really liked the position of everything. This is when I realized I felt like his neck was sitting a little bit too far back from his rib cage. This is of course due to the design of the dollar store skeletons. They're not completely 100% anatomically, there we go, accurate, and so I decided to move his spine up just a little bit. I'm going to create a little wooden bar that goes through the top of the rib cage, and by doing this I can just reposition his head so I feel like it's centered on top of his body a little bit better. Now I won't have to be fighting a big giant gaping hole where the top of his rib cage is once I start working on his skin or his paper mache. At this point, I was completely happy with how his base form was looking. I was happy with his posture and ready to move on to the next step. I'm going to be paper macheing over this entire skeleton with toilet paper. And this is because it's very thin, and if I use anything thicker, I don't think it would give the right effect. I'm going to start by reinforcing all the joints that I used hot glue. I'm adding some tacky glue over each joint, and then I'm wrapping the toilet paper around that joint and then squishing it into the glue to make sure that the glue takes hold. The tacky glue along with the toilet paper is going to be a much stronger connection over time than the hot glue. I'm going to do this for every single joint, so knee joints, ankle joints, hand joints, elbows, neck, everything. And once that's done, I will have an incredibly strong skeleton structure. Before moving on to the next step, I needed to do a little bit of painting. As you've probably noticed from the reference photo, this smoking man is charred black from his incident that probably is what landed him in the waiting room in the beginning. So before I put white toilet paper over his bones, I wanted to darken them a little bit. I also wanted to darken the toilet paper I had already put on his joints so that once I added the next layer, it wasn't peeping through. To start the final paper mache process, which is going to be his burnt skin, I'm mixing together PVA glue, in this case Elmer's, some water, and some black acrylic paint. The acrylic paint is going to help darken the white toilet paper so that I don't have any white bits that are showing through on the inside. I'm just going to tear it into small pieces. And first I'm going to lay down some of the mixture I just created onto the bones. Then I can add the toilet paper on top of that and then add some more of the mixture, making sure that the toilet paper is getting stuck down to every single part of the skeleton. While this process was a bit tedious because he's so small and some of the bones are so small, it was really fun and surprisingly easy to get all of these pieces laid down onto the skeleton. Because the toilet paper was so thin, it was easy to wrap around difficult sections, and it was also easy to tear if I felt like I had added too much. I made sure to have some of the bones still showing through because in the reference from the movie, you can really tell that you can see parts of his skeleton. However, there are still parts of his skin that are hanging on as well. If I got to an area where I felt like I had really soaked into the previously made joint bandages, which were basically just the toilet paper bandages I put over the elbows and hands, I decided to let that area dry in the chair just to make sure that there wasn't any movement on the part of the bones. So allowing him to dry every now and then was really helpful. I also decided at this point to paint his face black, and this way I could continue the toilet paper mache up the neck and over the face. I wasn't quite sure if I was going to do the face until I had worked with it a little bit, but I felt like it was thin enough that I could still see his features that I had so carefully sculpted through the toilet paper finish. And this way it would still give him a consistent skin texture from his body all the way up to his head. Once I did get to the face, I was extra careful to make sure I was laying down the toilet paper as flat as I could, because if there were many wrinkles or bumps, it would kind of start to hide the features that I had sculpted. So I just made sure to take my time and really press things down. At one point, I did scrape away some of the paper from the eyes and mouth, so I knew I had a flat clay surface to work on once I start painting those areas. This is how he was looking after allowing him to sit and dry for quite a while. I was pretty happy with the results on the texture, however I did feel like it was drying a little bit light, so I decided to go back with a little bit of watered down acrylic paint and go over the areas that I thought were too light. This was pretty easy, and the toilet paper, even though it had dried with the glue, still soaked up the paint really, really well. Once all of that was dry again, I could start working on the details of the face. In the movie, you can see his eyes and you can see a little bit of his teeth. So I'm starting by painting those areas white. I'm over painting them a little bit because I can always go back with black and define the areas. In the movie, it seems as though his eyes are bloodshot, so I'm going to be dry brushing just the tiniest bit of red around the outside of his eyeballs. I end up getting a little bit too much on there, so I go back with white and add a little bit more to the center. Anytime I paint a face, it just ends up being kind of a back and forth process until I like what I see. Now I'm using a little bit of black to define the edges of the eye and make them a little bit more refined. I did realize during this process he started looking a little bit more evil, I guess, because of the shape of the eye. I'm trying to keep him looking happy because he does seem kind of like a nice guy. I mean, he was offering Adam a cigarette and, you know, he's trying to make his stay a little bit nicer. I felt like his teeth and his eyes were just a little bit too white in contrast with the rest of his body, so I added some watered down brown paint over those areas, and then it was time to add the irises. Adding the irises always brings any creation to life because it starts to look like they're looking at you. And of course I have him looking off to the side as though he's ready to start a conversation with whoever comes and sits near him in the waiting room. And I'm pretty happy with how he's looking. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments. I think he looks like the guy. I'm pretty happy with the results. So of course now we need to add his little wisps of hair on top of his head. This next process was an idea I tried out in my captain's video, in the plant room video, but I'm going to try it again here because I think it will work this time. I'm going to be soaking this cotton swab with some black watercolor paint, and this is going to help dye it before I apply it to his head. And I think the wispiness of the cotton swab is really going to give that look that he has in the movie. I'm going to start pulling it apart because this is what's going to help me get that effect that I want. As you can see, it does have a little bit of an uneven color and it didn't stay very dark, but I can always add more color to it once it's on his head. To start applying the hair, I'm just going to be adding some PVA glue in small areas. I'm starting with the front hairline by cutting a straight cut across the bottom of the wisps I'm going to be adding for his hair. I'm not worrying about how long it is at the moment, but just making sure I have a flat side to glue it straight to the top of the head. I'm going across the front forehead area first, making sure that they're sticking straight up because that's how his hair is in the movie. I ended up adding him back into his chair and turning him around so I could really focus on the back of his head. Although we're not quite sure how it looks because in the movie he's really just a head that's pushed through the back of a chair, so he doesn't really have a back of a head in the movie. So I'm just kind of winging it to make sure I think it looks how he would look if he did have a back of a head. I kept the hair wisps kind of moving upwards so it all was in the same direction. I also tried to make sure and give him a few little sideburns even though he doesn't really have any ears left. This is how it's looking once I had initially applied the cotton swab. Once the glue dries completely, I can start working on his hairstyle. First, I'm going to make sure that it's all going straight up and in one direction. I'm going to be cutting it a little longer than I want it to be in the end, and this is because I'm going to start messing with the ends of the cotton swab pieces. This is why I thought the cotton swab would be a good idea, because you can kind of pull at the ends and it will kind of have a wispy, smoky effect. And then I can slowly cut a little bit more if I feel like I have too much hair. Once I had it to the height that I thought looked right or I thought looked good for his form, I just started pulling at the ends and making it look a little bit sporadic. Really, the nice thing about making the smoking man is he's, you haven't caught him on his best day, I guess, so if his hair's a little out of place, it's okay. I decided I wanted to add a little bit more black paint into his hair. So I'm using some black acrylic paint. I'm using acrylic this time instead of watercolor because if it dries hard, that's okay because the hair is now where I want it to be. But this is really going to blend his face into his hair and make it look like it's really one person who was unfortunately in, the predicament that he was in. So I'm just going to be doing this until I'm happy with the look and then let it dry completely. Now that his body and his look is complete, we can move on to his accessories. He wouldn't be the smoking man without a cigarette. I can also go ahead and unwrap the chair and make sure that he fits well in the chair that I designed him to sit in. And I'm very happy with how he looks. I think he looks incredibly comfortable and like he's been sitting there for years. I made this cigarette for him based off of a tutorial by Queen City Minis, which I will link in the description box below. I can't describe it better than she did, so make sure you check it out if you think this might add something to your project. I think he looks incredibly happy, but of course we're going to have to add his cigarette pack because he needs to offer it to Adam. Be mindful that this is not an endorsement for smoking or for Marlboro. I can't say Marlboro. But this is part of the movie and I'm duplicating the movie, so that's why this is in here. I decided that he needed several of these packages. Some of them are going to be empty and just scattered on the floor. However, I did want him to have a fresh pack with a few cigarettes sticking out of the top, so I'm going to be gluing those in one at a time. I'm only probably going to put 5 or 6 of them in here, but I'm having them come out of the top so you know that he is open to offering some other waiting room characters a cigarette while they wait. Here's how the finished piece looks. I do realize in the movie he has it in his hand, but I'm just going to be putting it to the side because honestly I didn't think about that in the beginning when I was posing him. But here's his finished look. I am extremely happy with how he turned out. I'm so happy with the little cigarette packs, and I think he's just going to be the perfect first addition to the waiting room. That's it for the smoking man. I am so excited with how he turned out. I definitely need to put him into the waiting room, so let's do that now. So here is our first visitor, or our first waiter, I guess I should say. And who knows, maybe he has been there the longest. I also received some ashtrays from Jolene. Thank you, Jolene. She runs Tiny Keyhole Minis, and I will put a link in the description box if you want to follow along. She made these cigarettes and ashtrays also following Queen City Minis tutorial, which I also linked in the description box, and they're just perfect for the waiting room, and I'm so excited to put everything together at the end once I have all the waiting room characters. But I just had to go ahead and insert them. She also sent an ashtray for Juno once I get to Juno's office. So thank you so much for those, Jolene. Here he is, just having a good time. However, I do think he's feeling a little bit lonely, so pretty soon I need to get him some friends. I'm going to be waiting until all of the characters are finished before I light up the room and we can see the final result of all the waiting room characters all together. But of course, I just couldn't resist seeing him in his little chair in the waiting room. They're all gonna be so adorable in their own creepy way. So as I said in the beginning, I want to go ahead and prep all the characters that are to come. Making miniature dolls can be incredibly complicated, especially when you're trying to make them resemble other characters that are really well known. So I'm going to be gathering materials I already have and making a shopping list of things I need to get so that when the time comes, I am ready to go and just make whoever is next. I'm going to be keeping the order that I am creating them a surprise, unless you're on Patreon because you just always know what I'm doing. But I think it'll be more fun that way. So first things first, let's get all of the pictures of the characters that I need and raid the fabric stash. Thankfully, I just organized it, which will be helpful. It's over there. My daughter recently decided to get rid of some shoe racks, so I've decided to reorganize my fabric. I have my large bolts of fabric, or fabric I have quite a bit of, in these pockets so that I can easily find what I'm looking for. However, I couldn't find exactly what I wanted in these pockets, and so I went to the drawers where my smaller pieces of fabric are organized into bags. This makes it much easier to find them. I've been in a huge organizing mood recently. So I got all of my fabrics organized, and they're organized by color. So reds, browns, creams, and so I'm just gonna go through here. I'm gonna rifle through and see if I can find the fabrics that I need. realized as I'm pulling these out that I actually need like detailed lists of everything I need to create. So I'm going to set aside the fabric for now, and I am printing off little photos of each one. Now I know it would be helpful if these were in color, however my color printer's throwing a fit. So I'm just gonna put everybody on here and then start making them their own little pile of stuff. And I'm also gonna make a list for each one so I know what each one needs. Let me get them on screen here. There we go. So now that I have all of their photos and their items laid out, and I also made sure to add color mentions on my list, even though I have black and white photos. And now I can start making piles so I know what I have. Thankfully, I knew I was gonna need a shark for the scuba diver, so I found this, and I'm just gonna have to figure out a way to make it work. Too bad his mouth isn't open, but we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. I also already had a little mini shotgun for the shrunken head man. I'm gonna try and follow the witch doctor's look as best as I can, and I have this beautiful ribbon that was sent to me from Singapore. I'm going to try and use that. I have this piece that I think could maybe be his headpiece. This is from an earring that broke. And I have some feathers that I think will help with his headdress. So this is what I'm starting with. It looks kind of like a disaster right now, but I can go through and figure out what I'm missing on each list and have them ready for when it's time to create each character. And I can't believe I almost forgot to tell you I have all the doll kit bodies ready to go. I pre-ordered them to make sure that they were here by Beetlegust. I'm going to be dividing them up into their packets so I make sure I have the right body with the right outfit. I will put the information for the doll artist I got these from. Some of them were quite a special order, and she did an amazing job matching the details of what I need. I'm sure you can guess who this is going to be. Also, just a note, she did offer to fix this that got broken in shipping, but I think he's going to be covered up, so I told her not to worry about it. Now it's time to showcase some of the miniatures you all sent in for the Beetlejuice project. This was the church created by W. Crossley for the diorama. They also sent in some kit boxes, which I think is really cool because Adam had all those kits. They also sent in a handbook and the little tag numbers for the waiting room characters, the witch doctor, and for Beetlejuice. Next, we have a house and a couple trees sent in by Susan. I love this house and it's already set up, so if I want to put light underneath it, the light will shine through the windows. These trees are so gnarly and will be perfect in the diorama. DM Mama sent in 3 different size houses because she wasn't quite sure what I wanted, and I love all of them. I love the little steps on the center one. Brittany wanted to make sure that the Charmed house was added to the collection, and she's also building a Charmed entire dollhouse on TikTok if you want to follow and see what she's doing. And she made this really cool box that it came in that's like the Charmed windows. Jolene, who made the ashtrays, also made these custom newspaper clippings, and they are going to be hung somewhere in the Beetlejuice house. I just love them. Thank you so much to everyone who sent something in. So that's all I have for you for the first video in this year's Beetlegust. I'm so excited to start working on the next set of Beetlejuice characters. Every video from now on is going to have 2 characters per video. And now that I have so many of the supplies ready, I'm just, let's go. Thank you all for joining me. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Let me know which character you're excited to see the most, and I will see you in the next video. Bye. I'm green. I'm not green. I'm green. I'm not green. Okay. Do that.